We experience the truth multiple times in worship. The truth that with us is God. Did you experience it during the choir anthem? That glorious song, and then the energy shifted. When Debbie March sang that amazing, beautiful solo. And then we had that click together when the choir picked back up. The click is something the staff and I use language of a click or a dip of the energy when we start resting deeper in this sacred space together, when we rest deeper in those arms of God's love. I also noticed that, how about you, during the time with the children? Did you see Garrett give the little cheer for, anybody else see that? The cheer when he heard that Miss Karen was going to be his teacher. It was that delight of, hey, I know her, and she is going to be with me. The joy, the curiosity, the wonder that our kids ask, that remind us that within them is that sacredness that delights in who they are. How about you? Do you notice it during our time of collective prayer, when the congregation comes to the microphone and with this openness and this vulnerability that is breathtaking, shares not only the beautiful aspects of their lives, our lives, but also a willingness to shed tears and the pain and invite one another in to walk this lifelong journey together? Do you notice it? Do you experience it? It is that with us is God, and when we breathe into it, we are participating in something that's happening not only here in this sacred space, but it's happening worldwide. There is a spiritual revolution afoot. There is a spiritual revolution afoot. And Diana Butler Bass, who our worship theme for the fall is based on, her work is called Grounded, Founding God in the World, a spiritual revolution. She tells us this. Now, however, the personal, the mystical, the immediate and intimate is emerging as the dominant way of engaging the divine. What was once reserved for a few saints has now become the quest of millions around the planet to be able to touch, to feel, and to know God for oneself. So we're living in a time of spiritual revolution, and we're going to get to the point about why this matters here, and how we're also seeing it in our culture, in the political landscape, in our educational landscape, in the way that we are together as a society. So spiritual, here's the working definition, right? That we have this source of love that can be known and experienced. Spiritual, a source of love that can be known and experienced. So a few months ago, do you all remember in the Star Tribune, anybody reading the Star Tribune? They had that series and it talked about how churches are dying and declining, and I found myself so frustrated. I said, why in the world are we continuing to fan these flames? Why are we continuing to tell this narrative of death when there's another opportunity? We see it here. Did you notice all our kids? You notice all the people that are here? We are a thriving, growing congregation. We are a congregation that knows that God is at foot and that we are paying attention to that. So yes, there is the rise of the nuns, the N-O-N-E-S's and the duns. But yet, might we ask a different question? And Diana Butler Bass says this: the headlines are clear. Every year more Americans are leaving organized religion. And yet, she says, might this decline actually be a signal? Might it actually be a signal that a major transformation in how people understand and experience God is happening? So this distant God of conventional religion has given way to a more intimate sense of the sacred that saturates the world. So it's this God that can be found on the horizons of nature and human community. It's at the heart of this spiritual revolution. So what used to be, and what many sermons, and it's really a challenge, y'all, to find hymns that doesn't continue this erroneous, I'm not going to say erroneous, this narrative that is going away. In the hymnal, it's challenging to find hymns that don't continue to perpetuate this, and the music and the sermons that we give. So back in the day, and it's still happening now, right? We used to hear about this three-tiered world, that God was in some heaven far away, and then here we were. Do we have any children in the... Here we are, yes, here on earth, and then there's this underworld where there's supposed to be this fire that some of us may go to, and we're afraid of that, right? So there's the vertical three-tiered universe, and we've been taught that for years and years, and yet during the last century, this three-tiered universe, with its ordered certainty, has crumbled. We as a world have faced world wars, the Vietnam War, the Holocaust, the death camps. We've experienced 9/11. We've experienced Sandy Hook in December 2012. And many people are asking, for God's sake, where is God? And depending on where you enunciate those words, you get your answer, right? So where is God? God, we are learning. We are experiencing the ancient wisdom that our spiritual ancestors know is right here. God is right here with us. That source of love that can be experienced isn't far away. It's right in this room, and it's residing right within you. So the shift that we're seeing from a vertical way of understanding theology, how we talk about God, to this flattening also is happening in the world in which we live, right? The postmodernity that we hear a lot about, and our access to knowledge. I've shared the story, and I'll share it again. When my spouse and I were visiting my parents in Seattle, my son a few years ago wanted to know, and he asked his grandpa, what's the largest number that exists? So my wife and I, we go for our phones, right? Because that's where we're going to find it out. My son's grandfather goes to the World Book encyclopedias that are still in our home from probably 1978, right? So the shift from there is all the knowledge right here in the World Book encyclopedias to our phone, which we Google to learn, yes, Google is the largest number. So it's thank you. It's the way, it's just making sure we're in this together. So it's the way we access knowledge, right? It's been flattened, and it's not just one voice who decides in the World Book Encyclopedia. It's many that can go onto Wikipedia. Wikipedia, yes, who's telling the story and who's not telling the story, and whose voice is heard and whose voice is being silenced. So we're seeing this flattening as well happening in our lives and how we engage with one another. Social media, everybody's got an opinion. Yet are we willing to sit down and talk with one another across the table, to look eye to eye and heart to heart, to see that with us and across that table is another human being that the Creator resides within too. Grassroots movement in our political scheme. Yes, y'all with me? So we're witnessing this flattening not only in the spiritual revolution, but in worldwide ways that we govern one another, the ways that we interact with one another. So where is God? God is with us. Jewish scholar Abraham Heschel says this, that God is the God of pathos, who loves the world profoundly, feels with creation, and participates in its life. God is with us not only in times of misery and anguish, but also amidst our joy, when we forget to ask, and in the mundane experiences of daily life. Where is God? God is right here with us. What then does that mean about how God's presence enlivens our very lives as we participate in this world? Butler Bass says then that when we ask the question, where is God, and we say right here, that means we are relocating God right here to be the ground of our very lives. To relocate God is to reground our lives. We as a community are committed to being rooted, but not stuck. We're committed to being deeply rooted, so when the winds of change happen, so when conflict, when those questions happen, we can be deeply rooted in our God, and yet we can move and sway. Thus the visuals of the plants, yes, and the rootedness that we have together. So what we're participating in here, church, together, and it's happening here, and we encounter this tension all the time, is a God who's come near. A divine nearness who comes close, who's compelled by this burning desire to make heaven on earth and to occupy our very hearts. It's a theology not of distance, yet it's a theology of nearness, from institution to unmediated experience. We know that the problem of evil is real. We know it's very real. And I agree with Butler Bassett. She says that human beings create the vast majority of what has been deemed evil. Evil is not God's problem as much as it is ours. And yet if we believe that with us is God, that within creation there's not this distant God, but a God right here, this is a God who breathes hope and healing into each of us. So what would it look like, church, if we continue to choose life? That we decide if our church will thrive and how it will thrive together. We decide what our future will look like. Of course, we know the Spirit is at work amongst us, and yet it's up to us to co-create that future in which God has drawn near, because we are a people who are grounded. We are a people who are committed to an extravagant welcome. Do you all know how rare that is? When you look around your workplace, when you're out and about, to have an extravagant welcome where we truly can say to one another, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you're welcome here. Of course, we speak out against violent and destructive behaviors. However, do you know how rare that is to be a place where we can say lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, black, white, brown, yellow are invited and valued here? We get to choose life when we acknowledge that we are on journeys together of transformation. Worship is supposed to work on us so that when we leave here, we might be uncomfortable or something may have clicked for us or we may have experienced that deepening, but we get to be different than when we first came in. And you all were fabulous when you came in, so can you imagine when you leave how fabulous you will be? And I mean that seriously. We get to choose how we will make this world a more just and generous place, because we need a more just and generous world and community and relationships. So yes, we're participating in a spiritual revolution, one that I hope will deepen you so that you can experience that love that has named you and claimed you and never will let you go. So let us be a people where God is our ground from which we move and have our very being. And what does that look like? And I'll end here. Well, we're going to have 3 more months, but I'll end here for today. The spiritual revolution, Butler Bass says, is finding God in the world, is an invitation to new birth, most especially for religion. And that new birth is happening. You can hear it as the earth groans for salvation, as poets and philosophers tell stories, as scientists search the soil and the cosmos for life, as the oppressed and the poor and the marginalized push for dignity and economic justice. It is time for the church to wake up. There is nothing worse than sleeping through a revolution. Where is God, my beloved?